Welcome to Cody in the Cinema. I had heard about the 2025 The King of Kings animated feature film that had voice actors like Oscar Isaac, Kenneth Branagh, Pierce Brosnan, this huge cast, and it made me think, gosh, I haven't actually watched the 20s version, the 1927 Cecil B. DeMille classic, and I actually found out it's in the Criterion Collection. And I talk about so many Criterion films, and this one being out of print as a DVD, that I had to look into it. And I had been hesitating for a long time with this film because I thought it might just be sort of outdated or too long or something strictly meant for someone who was really invested in the concept of Christianity or practiced the faith or, had a strong interest in cinema history. And I didn't necessarily know how effective and great of a film it would be until I watched it. And I've got to tell you, among the silence I've seen, this is as good as any of them. That includes other great religious based around religion, the Joan of Arc, the Passion of Joan of Arc from the 20s as well. I mean, this is a great film that I think more people should see. And I wanted to talk a little bit about it. This isn't really a review about, Christianity in general or atheism or Jesus Christ himself. This is more a review of the film and sort of how I reacted to it. And I'm going to try to be as objective as I can in sharing that with you, but we're all going to have a different reaction to a film like this, right? Because, Christianity, Jesus, the stories therein, there's a lot going on with that. But let me tell you what I thought about it. So I really, from the beginning, I knew that this film was going to be special. I was expecting something really straightforward, some Bible verses to show up, and we'd instantly be introduced to Jesus. But actually, the film opened with some Technicolor shots of Mary Magdalene, of all people, who was hearing about this carpenter who was pulling a certain disciple away from her attention. And so she goes to meet this carpenter. And when we meet Jesus, and the film goes back to black and white, there is a scene in there. And anyone who's interested in anything related to film or Christianity or any of that really needs to see at least that first entrance and introduction to Jesus, because without spoiling it, there is a miracle that happens and we get an introduction to Christ through that miracle. And it is a beautiful opening shot that not only gives us, a sense of the God power of Jesus in this story, but it also just makes us feel warm and tender toward his character, because there's not really any part of this film that, for me, it made me think too much of the religious aspect of this. I mean, I was more captivated by the pure humanity of the film. This is a warm, inviting, stern at times Christ who I think anyone can relate to of any background or belief system. In other words, this is a deeply human film, as well as a technically brilliant one. And I like that the film is actually a silent film. And let me explain what I mean. Because there isn't a whole lot of dialogue, you're sort of forced to take in the surroundings, even at that, smaller aspect ratio. You're forced to look at all the beggars or the people who are following Jesus. It gives you a greater appreciation of sort of the spectacle of the thing. I know some of you have, seen My Voyage to Italy, for example, where Scorsese talks about these old Italian silent epics that were similar, and you just don't really get that with CGI. And I think some of those effects have just aged beautifully in that regard. Another thing that just is kind of like a happy little accident. So because this is a silent film, if a character does something that requires you to read the words, the way the film works, a character will say something that's very natural to the narrative that builds the story. And sometimes that will show up as just, dialogue that's written on the card that you read, but then sometimes it will just be a Bible verse that's organically woven in, and you never really feel like, okay, I got to cover this Bible verse. How do I do that with the story? It's more like a clever use of Bible verses to tell the story. And so you get a sort of natural use of that. And I think for people that are watching this film purely for religious reasons, you could almost pause those moments and discuss them if you wanted to. And it actually helps sort of make this thing, watchable in pieces if you don't have 2.5 hours to watch it in one setting, although I think you could, and it's not boring ever. This is a really compelling, well-acted feature film. And the one time that I really felt like the silent film really like nailed it was the Last Supper scene. I don't think that would have worked as well as a talkie, as a movie you would see with regular dialogue, because you're kind of imagining while you're looking at the Last Supper what each character might be saying or thinking, particularly Judas, who I'll try to talk about in a second. What really sells this film, though, is the masterful acting from H.B. Warner, who you might recognize from other pictures. He's in It's a Wonderful Life, for example. I believe he's in another James Stewart movie, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I think he's in that one. But he plays Jesus so perfectly. He's timeless. He's stoic. He's kind of just godlike in his complexion. And he gets so much empathy out of you. You feel so drawn to him as anybody in that situation would. And interestingly enough, when I was kind of like listening to different interviews and stuff about this film, I think, to my understanding, the director kind of kept him separated in different ways from the rest of the cast. So it kind of built that aura around him. And you feel that on the screen. You feel like you are watching someone magnificent, which is what the film is trying to accomplish. In fact, I believe that even, cast members had very strict rules while they were filming this thing about what they could or couldn't do outside of work. And that in part was because the director had such a respect for the story and wanted to do great work with it. And no matter what story you're telling, I always appreciate when a director cares about and loves the subject matter. And so again, whether you are Christian, atheist, agnostic, whatever your belief system is, or if you're in an entirely different faith, I think you can appreciate that aspect of it, the care and the detail and the respect for the source material. The symbols all work really well. The most effective one, we have things like coins, the coins that relate to Judas's betrayal. That scene's brilliant. The cross is really good, but the one that's really stuck with me is the crown of thorns, because the way the crown of thorns is put on Jesus's head in this movie, it gets so much empathy and so much compassion out of you. It's so beautiful, and this film shows restraint because it's not the graphic kind of film that you got with, like, say, The Passion of the Christ. There's the scenes where he's being whipped. A lot of the times you kind of see everyone else's reaction to the whipping. For example, and then there's one shot where you see another character looking at the shadows of him being whipped, and it leaves a lot to your imagination. And again, it just makes it really easy to empathize with him as a character. I talked a little bit about how the crowds are a big focus in this film, and the people and the love of Christ for children. But there's something else that I really appreciated about this movie that I think will appeal to most of us. And that is this: the true enemy, the true antagonist of Jesus and the disciples really seems to be greed, power, money. If there's one thing that constantly, nips at the heels of Christ and his disciples in this film, it is that. This movie is like the dead opposite of a prosperity gospel style Christianity. And I think if you've been drawn to that in any way, you're probably not going to like the film as much, because the film has nothing nice to say about very rich, very powerful people in that respect. People who don't, use their talents wisely, don't use the wisdom, don't show love, those kinds of things. I think you're going to notice that in the film. It's good-natured in that way. There are other scenes that are just technically brilliant, like the introduction of Pilate, for example. There's like there's like these torches and these big eagle, like this big eagle statue thing behind him, and it really helps you to see his power as well politically. The sort of bureaucracy of that part of the story is effectively brought out here, and I appreciate that. It's sort of like an interesting subplot with Pilate. And by the way, one thing this film wisely does, which I didn't know going in, Judas, his character, is given a lot of screen time. And we really get to see why Judas did what he did. And it sort of follows the greater narrative. And I think that the angle that the film took really makes Judas more than just a simple throwaway character of someone who did something temporarily evil, and sort of shows you the ramifications of that from the beginning and why maybe he was interested And again, it kind of plays into that bureaucracy, that political situation as well. It's just really smartly written in that way. Those are the biggest thoughts I had with the film. Although I also just want to say, like, if I don't see that much religious content that's this warm in tone, and I just loved it. It like I said, in the same way that the Passion of Joan of Arc, that silent film really draws you in and evokes that sense of empathy, so does this film. And so I don't think you're going to find it to be corny or overly preachy. At least I didn't. That having been said, there are definitely religious elements. I mean, this is Jesus that we're talking about. Who do I think would really enjoy this film? So I think every single film fan like me who loves the Criterion Collection and really enjoys the history of film and like the technical sort of prowess, you need to see this and get your own impression, because I loved that part of it as much as anything. It's a beautifully shot film. The camera work is impeccable. It's just great. Also, I think if you are interested in Christianity, like in any passing way, in any serious way, like if you're a preacher, a youth leader, if you're into any of that kind of stuff, you really should watch at least parts of this film. At least watch a few scenes, if nothing else. Like I said, watch some of the miracles. The very first miracle that Jesus does in the film, I promise you're going to like that, and see what you think. Like, I just about imagine that people who would be interested in this for a religious reason have sat through hours of boring sermons somewhere along the line that you didn't really click with. That won't be the case here, I don't think. This is a quick 2.5 hours, and the crucifixion and all that stuff that happens, like, you're going to be invested in that. And I think really anybody that's just interested in film, like, I don't think you have to have any kind of interest in Christianity to enjoy this film. I did want to know what your thoughts were, if you've seen it and maybe you didn't like it at all, or you had a very negative reaction to it as a result of the religion itself. I don't know. I wanted to hear what your thoughts were, but I suspect that a lot of people really do love the film. And, I thought it was something cool to talk about, because some number of people are going to watch the animated film and maybe have never even heard of the Cecil B. DeMille version. Note that it's different than, there's a 50s version. That's not the one I'm talking about. I'm very specifically talking about that full 2.5 hour cut, because there's also another cut that's a little shorter that I haven't seen, that has a whole different score, and I like the score the Criterion Channel had. So those are my thoughts. Beautiful film, really like it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did and you want to click like to support the channel, please feel free to do that. Note that sometimes I do cover films related to religion. The Wicker Man, for example, which some people that were watching this video might find to be sacrilegious. I really like The Wicker Man. I talked about that on here. I talked about The Evil Preacher, Robert Mitchum, The Night of the Hunter. You might like that stuff. You could please consider subscribing if you do, or like I said, leave your thoughts about the film. And we'll see you next time on Cody in the Cinema.